Hello friends, this is the lesson number 20 in this series of criticism in English literature. And in this lesson we shall discuss William Wordsworth as a literary critic. We all know William Wordsworth as a romantic poet, but as far as the criticism in English literature is concerned, what he has to say. So all these things we shall discuss pretty soon. But first, just to try to imagine that what were the backgrounds of the time when he was writing in poetry. So at that time, the first major development we see, that is the French Revolution, because the Romantic period, it uh, it starts with the late 18th century and the early part of the 19th century. It goes through, and during that time, the first, as I mentioned, that it was French Revolution, the major event, or the, you can say, the happening of the 18th century. French Revolution, also there was American independence. But one more thing that was quite prominent, which really affected his poetry, that was industrialization. In the late 18th century, the industry developed, flourished all over Europe. A number of or various kind of industries developed. So that really had a huge impact on the common life, and that really impacted his poetry as well. So two things, industrialization and also the French Revolution. Why I say French Revolution? Because French Revolution really gave new hopes to the people. People started thinking liberally, and apart from that, there was also the age of neoclassical people, or the people who were writing the classic literature again with their own style, and you can say their own way they were writing. They were applying some strict rules in their writing. So these three things we can just notice. And now starting about his views, first we consider the two terms. Not okay, term is simply the one, but most of the time we see them written in different manner, like romantic. Sometime it is written with the capital letter R, romantic or romanticism, and most of the times you may have seen in ordinary text it is written with smaller r, romantic or romanticism. So when we talk about with the capital R, the word, it really it signifies the romanticism, the movement of the romantic poets. But when there is the smaller letter, the small letter, that is romantic, it commonly taken as the meaning, the most of time we see that like a love affair, like a romantic poet, or he's a means he's a having romance, romantic. So all these are quite similar terms, means a love based things, which typically we take like the love between boy and girl, or man and woman. That small r in romantic, that signifies. Okay, now about his views. So you remember that he has written a work, a preface to lyrical ballad. Lyrical Ballad is a collaborative work by William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge. And in that work, at the beginning, there is a preface written by William Wordsworth. Okay, one thing you should note, that the first volume of Lyrical Ballad is without preface. So there is no particular introduction written by William Wordsworth. But when the second volume was published in the year 1801, it was published with a preface, and in that preface there are views given by him. So first, why he introduced the preface in the second volume. He says that because in the second volume there were some new poems introduced, they had their new style and theme, so that is why, to give a brief introduction about them, he wrote that preface. And it is considered as a romantic manifesto on poetry and society. Preface to Lyrical Ballad is considered, okay, it may be asked in a question, as a question, that is, it is considered as a romantic manifesto on poetry and society. So what he says in this, He is simply admiring the nature. That is also the major theme in his poems. We find he's admiring the nature. Nature means something that is quite natural, like sun, earth, moon, and everything we find, like forest, trees, flowers, rivers, everything. So he's admiring the rural side. So in the beginning I mentioned there was a development in the industrialization, and when industrialization was happening, the people from the rural areas, they were moving from the villages or the rural or the countryside to the city life. So the people were moving towards the city, and in the cities they were not feeling that much happy. They were leading a life of you can say the daily life means activities. There was no leisure at all for them. So that is why those overburdened lives were criticized by William Wordsworth in his poem, and he was admiring the rural life. So here William Wordsworth says that the city life makes us as a machine that fails to appreciate the beauty of life. Very well said. City life makes us as a machine that fails to appreciate the beauty of life. So simple concept that natural things, rural life, that is admired, and the developed things like industrialization and city life, all these things are criticized. Now about his views about poetry. The common definition you find about poetry that it is an overflow of spontaneous powerful feelings or emotions resulted of a long deep reflection collected in tranquility. That is the long definition we can take. Okay, we'll try to analyze this definition. So overflow of spontaneous powerful feelings. So you have feelings, you have emotional means feeling arousing in your mind, and these are overflowing. So means in your life you might have a situation where you are utmost happy, or you are so much sad, you are in sorrows. Your emotions are simply overflowing. Second, at that time you are just experiencing those emotions. So you are not supposed to write the poetry that moment. At that moment you are simply supposed to just experience those emotions first. And when the time comes when these emotions are subsided, like you are utmost happy today, and you are enjoying this moment, so simply just experience this moment. Nothing to think about the poetry. But after 10 days, 15 days, or even a week or 2 days, whenever these emotions are simply subsided, at that time you are in tranquility. So you have to now collect those emotions what you are experiencing that time. So you simply have to write when these emotions are past, subsided. Only then, when you are in emotions, you cannot write perfectly. So you have to take a time after the you can say the passage of the emotions, then think about how you were experiencing or how you were feeling those emotions, then you should write poetry. This is what William Wordsworth says. For this, William Wordsworth says that there are 4 stages. The first stage is the observation. When you have powerful emotions, you simply observe those, you just experience those emotions. Second stage is the recollection. Here you are just recalling your experience. It means the emotions are subsided and now you are recalling. It may be after the gap of 2 days, 3 days, or many days. And then filtering. Third step is the filtering. So in that experience or in that imagination, when you are just recalling, you have to remove the unnecessary things. You have to filter your emotions. Only essential things has to be put into the poetry. So remove unessential or non-essential things. And the fourth is the imaginative creativity. So now when the emotions are simply past, sometimes you might have seen that when you recall your past memories of happiness, even you are in at the present you are in sorrows or you are facing some difficult times, When you think of those past happiness, you try to smile a bit. We tend to smile a bit when we experience or when we recall the past emotions of happiness. Why? That is the imaginative. Because we are just feeling those past emotions. So similar thing, he says that one should, at the fourth step, one should imaginatively experience those emotions. So how were the excitement when you were having that happiness in the past? So these are the four steps: observation, recollection, filtering, and imagination. There is one more point that when you imagine yourself, only then there is a possibility that reader would also try to feel those emotions. Like you are a poet and you are imagining that your happiness. You have experienced that happiness in the past and now you are imagining that happiness. So similar thing can be observed by even by the reader, but it can happen only when you follow these four steps: observation, recollection, filtering, and imagination, or imaginative excitement of emotions, whatever you call it. Then he says several things about a good poet. He simply says that a good poet is a man speaking to men. Means a poet is talking to the other people, many people. He is simply talking to them. It is nothing has to be like so much decorative or stylish. Simply a man speaking to men. He tries to communicate his perception, experience of truth and beauty with the fellow people. So poet has to be highly sensitive. Only with you can say sensitive and being emotional one can communicate to the other people. So great knowledge of human sense, he also says that it is nothing about the knowledge of wisdom or so, only about human emotions and human senses, human nature that one should have. So that really makes a comprehensive soul of a poet. If one has a knowledge of human emotions and natures and senses, that really makes his soul as a very comprehensive one. And then he talks about subject matter or the content of the poetry. So he simply says that poetry can be of any matter, of any subject it can be, but he adds that poetry should add meaning to the poetry subjects. He advises that one should not use very highly elevated topics, simply topics from ordinary life, from everyday life. For example, from his poems like Solitary Reaper, that simply talks about a girl and about music that she is enjoying reaping and with sickle, and the poem like Daffodils simply admiring the flowers and the natural things. So simply he says that the poetry should belong to the everyday life, to the common things that one experiences in his life. And then he talks about diction and style. Here William Wordsworth, what he says, he simply says that poetry and prose both should have same diction. And artificial style of Pope and Dryden, he is simply criticizing the grand style in which Alexander Pope used to write. He is simply criticizing that artificial style. So the poetry has to be in a common, means a very simple language, not in a grand style that one should not find it difficult to understand. So poetry has to be pretty simple. He says that one should not try to ornamentalize, means not to be decorative with the language. So rustic or simple common language has to be used, but there has to be emotions and passions in everyday life. He says that in everyday life, how the language we use, that is humble and rustic. So same sort of same sort of a language should be used in the poetry. According to him, it gives poetic truth and beauty. So just remember, poetic truth and beauty, this concept is talked by William Wordsworth. And in yes in lyrical ballad, each poem in this collection, each poem is an experiment on language usage. So different kind of language usage is applied on each and every poem in this collection. So as a whole, if I say that he simply rejects that there should be any kind of poetic diction. He says, when taking both poetry and prose, he says that there can be a difference in the meter. When we consider poetry and prose, there definitely there will be a difference in the meter, but the language has to be the same, so there shouldn't be that much difference in the language. You may have if you have gone through the original text of the plays like William Shakespeare's plays like Hamlet or even Othello or so, you see that these are somewhere written in the poetic form when you read them. So similar sort of things he says that even the language in poetry and prose has to be of a same style, or same, you can say, the caliber, but the meter has to be different. And now in the last segment of this video, we are discussing the function of the poetry, what William Wordsworth feels. He says that the immediate pleasure is the main purpose of the poetry. So it should give pleasure to the human mind, but alongside it should also give moral values and moral truth. So instruction means moral values or truth is instruction, and pleasure or emotions, arising emotion is something like, so pleasure or giving relief to the mind. So these two things, but first is the pleasure. So then he talks about the poetic truth and beauty. Poetic truth is higher than the philosophical truth. So if you are saying a truth through the poetry, and the same truth if you are saying with the philosophy, then William Wordsworth says that the poetic truth is so effective, and what philosophy cannot do, poetry does it with ease. So saying the same thing, if you want to say, like you are giving moral lecture to the people, you are telling them that you should do this in your life, you should do this. This is something like a philosophical truth. And if you are saying the same thing in the form of poetry, according to William Wordsworth, that will be so much effective and give you a great result. So poetic truth is higher than the philosophical truth. Poetry in itself, according to William Wordsworth, it is philosophy. So poetry is no way different from the philosophy. In fact, poetry in itself is a kind of philosophy. And humble and pretty, you can say, simple language that adds beauty to the poetry, and one can easily say high things with the simple language. So that's all we have about the views given by William Wordsworth. Okay, one more point, that is simply a term used by William Wordsworth that was also asked in UGC NET exam: spots of time. Spots of time, this is the term used by him in Prelude. So Prelude is a work by William Wordsworth, and in that work, the chapter number 12, there he mentions this. Spots of time means some key moments of our life that really changes our life. Okay, we can take the, you can say, deeper meaning of this term as well. Like these are small memorable events that occur in the when we are close to the nature. So spots of time, when human beings are close to the nature, and these moments really change our mind, that really, you can say, something like a life-changing moments. Maybe small moments, not that much significant in worldly eyes, but somewhere the view of the nature really changes our life. So just one thing to remember, the spots of time term given by William Wordsworth, and it is in the Prelude, chapter number 12. And now we have several questions about William Wordsworth and his criticism about poetry. There's one critic, famous critic, the name is Matthew Arnold. He calls William Wordsworth just after Shakespeare and Milton. So he is admiring Wordsworth. Who is admiring? Matthew Arnold. And he is saying that he is just after. So he is considering Shakespeare, Milton and Wordsworth as the greats of the English literature. And he also says that he is not fully recognized at home but at abroad. Yes, this is a typical line. I shall read this from the poem. That is what Arnold says, that he is not fully recognized at home. So at home means in England he is not that much recognized. He is not recognized at all abroad. So even in the other countries he is not that much recognized. Yet I firmly believe that the poetical performance of Wordsworth is just after that of Shakespeare and Milton, of which all the world now recognizes the worth. So he says that the whole world now is recognizing him, and his poetical performances are just after Milton and Shakespeare. So this is said by Matthew Arnold for William Wordsworth. And one more question we have similar to this, where William Wordsworth is praising John Milton. So in another question, William Wordsworth is praising John Milton and he is calling him Milton's soul was like a star. Milton's soul was like a star. So what were the lines? I just tried to recite. Thy soul was like a star and dwelt apart. Thou hadst a voice whose sound was like a sea, pure as the naked heavens, majestic, free. So these are the lines from the poem London 1808. It was written in 1802, and in the collection The National Independence and Liberty. Okay, that doesn't matter much. So the poem in London, here Wordsworth is praising Milton as he is calling him, his soul was like a star. Another question, poetry is a criticism of life which follows the laws of poetic truth and beauty. I told you earlier that poetic truth and beauty, this term belongs to William Wordsworth. So simple answer is it is said by William Wordsworth. Another question, spots of time. So this term is coined by William Wordsworth. The next question, poetry is a breadth and finer spirit of all knowledge. Poet is a breadth and a finer spirit of all knowledge, and it is also said by William Wordsworth in the preface of Lyrical Ballads. In Lyrical Ballads, another question we are discussing now, there were several statements about lyrical ballad, and we have to choose which are the correct ones and which one is not. So correct statements like it has only one proper ballad, Rhyme of Ancient Mariner. You might have heard this name, Rhyme of Ancient Mariner, written by S.T. Coleridge. It carries pastoral and other poems, so it contains several such poems. Carries preface added in the second edition. So in Lyrical Ballad, I mentioned earlier, in the second edition, which was written in 1801, in that edition the preface is added. It is written by William Wordsworth. But which statement is not correct? It has no link with the Thomas Gray's elegy written in the country's churchyard. Another pre-romantic poet, Thomas Gray, and he has written an elegy. The name is Elegy Written in the Country's Churchyard, and Lyrical Ballad has no link with this poem at all. The next question is a typical one, so we just have to remember or cram. So a quote is there: to choose incidents from common life and to relate or describe them as far as possible. If you try to figure out the meaning, pretty simple. To choose the incidents from the common life and relate or describe them as far as possible. So after dash, now we have to complete the line from the given options, and the right option is to relate or describe them as far as possible in the selection of language rarely used by men. So we can, if somewhere we can relate this question to William Wordsworth, then the option quite similar to this, that the language is really used by men. So the same thing he is saying. The next question, opening of the prelude. The opening, how it was, how it opens. He was fostered alike by fear and beauty of nature. The opening line of the prelude. Prelude is a work written by William Wordsworth, and in the opening line it is, he was fostered alike by fear and beauty of nature. And one last question, sweet is the lore which nature brings. These are the lines. Sweet is the lore which nature brings, our meddling intellect misshapes the beauteous forms of things. We murder to dissect. What is the meaning of these lines? So the meaning of these lines is to we connect nature to connect more than intellectual. So we connect to the nature more than intellectual. And these are the lines from the poem Table Turned by William Wordsworth. So that's all we have to discuss about William Wordsworth, his views about poetry. About his poems we shall discuss in the British literature segment, and in the next video we shall discuss Samuel Taylor Coleridge, his views about poetry pretty soon. So thanks for watching this lesson. Have a nice day.